I'm Halitzaliga is my ancestral name. I come from Samish. My English name is Leslie Eastwood, and I'm here and happy to tell a little bit about the story of Ko-Kwal-Alwoot. She is an immortal being that watches over and protects all of our Samish people. A long time ago, there was a lovely village here next to Deception Pass at a place called Rosario. And there's actually just around the corner from Rosario Head, there's a lovely bay called Bowman Bay. And there was lots of spring water, and the tide would go out far, and it was a perfect place for the people to be protected and be able to go out and gather shellfish. Ko-Kwal-Alwoot was the oldest daughter of a really important head man in that village. And as a high-class young woman, it was her responsibility to go out and gather shellfish and help the other young maidens gather food for their families. So while Ko-Kwal-Alwoot was out gathering shellfish with some of the other young ladies in her village, she often sang a gathering song to the shellfish. And this one particular day, she saw a shell in the water and she reached for it, and the waves carried it out beyond her reach. And so she continued to grasp for it and moved deeper and deeper into the water until all of a sudden she saw a face below the water, and it startled her. It was the face of a very handsome young man. And she gasped and turned back and went back to her village, and this continued for a number of days, where she had evidence of this strange young man that was under the water gazing up at her. And one other day she was reaching down for some crab or mussel or other shellfish in the water, and a hand grasped hers, and she was again startled but transfixed at the very same time. And at that particular day, the young man stepped out of the water and said, "Do not be afraid. That I've been watching you, and I've been listening to your beautiful voice. And I'm here to tell you that I'm the ruler of all of the things that are under the sea, all of the sea creatures. And I've fallen in love with you, and I would love for you to be my bride." And Ko-Kwal-Alwoot immediately had a strange and powerful affection for this strange, mysterious man that had stepped up out of the water. And she let him know right away they would have to ask her parents' permission, but she wasn't confident about that. So they came up onto shore, and when they did, all the villagers noticed a chill had come across the village, and they were awestruck by this strange figure that was accompanying Ko-Kwal-Alwoot. And when she came to her parents, he introduced himself as king of all of the sea creatures, and letting them know that he came to ask for Ko-Kwal-Alwoot's hand in marriage. And right away, the father got angry and said no, he would forbid that, because there was no way his daughter could survive under the water. And the king of all of the sea creatures told him that he could work magic on Ko-Kwal-Alwoot. He had powers to fix her so that she could live and breathe under the water, and that she would not only live and breathe under the water, she would become immortal like him and be with him for all time. And again, the parents refused and said, absolutely not. We can't give up our daughter like this. And so the king of all of the sea creatures said, therefore, I shall take away all the fish, all the shellfish, all your streams will dry up, and your berries will wither and fall off the vines. And with that, in anger, he went back out to the sea. And true to his word, from that moment on, the fishermen would go out to harvest, and their nets would come back empty. The ladies would go out to gather shellfish for their people, and their baskets would come home empty. They found nothing. The berries had immediately dried up and withered and fallen off the vines, and all of the freshwater streams dried up. Ko-Kwal-Alwoot was so heartbroken to see all of the people in her village suffering. They were starving, they had no food, there was nothing fresh for them to drink. And she went to her parents and begged them and said, I know you're worried, but I also believe with all my heart that this king of all of the sea creatures can take care of me so that I will be safe with him. And she begged them to reconsider. And based on the suffering of all of their community, they said, all right, my daughter, you go out there and you call him back. So she did. She went out to the shore and she started singing and she called him in. And with that, the parents said they would give permission for them to be married, but on one condition, that once a year, Ko-Kwal-Alwoot come back and visit them and be able to show them that she's safe and that she's happy and that she's being well cared for. And so immediately the king of all of the sea creatures agreed, and immediately the water started teeming with fish, and you could see the little crabs sort of floating around in the water, and everything returned and was plentiful. And a great feast was held to celebrate because the people had been hungry. So with that, the wedding was held that very same day. Ko-Kwal-Alwoot bid goodbye to her parents, and they watched as she and the king of all of the sea creatures walked out into the water until nothing could be seen but her long flowing hair. True to her word, a year later, Ko-Kwal-Alwoot came back to visit her people, and they noticed that she now had some barnacles and some limpets growing on her arms and her legs, and bits and strands of seaweed and seagrass in her hair. And she had a chill about her when she walked on the land. They were happy that she was doing well. And then the next year she came back, and even more sea creatures had entwined themselves on strands of her hair and were clinging to her body. And even little bits of scales started to appear on her skin. And more of her hair looked like kelp ribbons and seaweed. And again, she seemed sad and lonely when she was in the village. And the third year, when she came back, the majority of her skin was covered in scales, and almost all of her hair was now long ribbons of kelp instead of that beautiful long dark hair. And the fourth year, when Ko-Kwal-Alwoot came back, her eyes had a fishy, glassy stare to them, and she no longer seemed comfortable interacting with people in her village, and she stood on the shore and gazed out to sea. Her body was completely covered in scales. Her hair was now completely kelp, and there were little sea creatures all over her, and her parents were very concerned about her well-being in the village, and they talked among themselves, and they came to a conclusion that they came back to Ko-Kwal-Alwoot and said, my daughter, we love you dearly, but we can see that you're no longer happy here. But it's heartbreaking for us to watch you suffer when you come home to visit us. So therefore, we're going to release you from that promise. We know that where your home is now is with the king of all of the sea creatures, and that's the place that makes you happy. So you don't have to come visit us anymore unless you really want to. And so with that, Ko-Kwal-Alwoot thanked her parents for being loving and understanding, and she said, I will always make sure that there's plenty of fish for you, lots of shellfish, lots of fresh water, and I will watch over you forever. And so with that, the family said farewell to Ko-Kwal-Alwoot, knowing that she would always be there protecting them. And she went out to sea until all they could see was the long flowing ribbons of kelp. So to this day, the Samish people truly believe that when we come out to this place and we see the kelp ribbons there, that's a reminder to us of her devotion to her Samish people and the kindness and generosity with which she lives.